Hello, everyone. Welcome to School After Hours podcast, where staff, administrative, and families keep their finger on the pulse of the wonderful world of OST programming, aka out of school time programming. I am your host, Jay Lee, and today we have the wonderful Katherine Spinney with us. She is a professional development coach for out of school time program practitioners, a blogger, a businesswoman, and so much more. For this show, we'll be talking about key fundamentals OST practitioners and youth development professionals should know before and during the job. But before we jump into the interview, let's go to our community corner. Well, I know you're asking yourself, what is community corner? I know. Community Corner is a new segment to the show that allows guests or myself to share tips, advice, or information with families, youth, and community members. For today's Community Corner, I asked Katherine, what do you think parents should know about a program before he, she, they enrolls their child? Here's her response.
Thank you so much, Janice, and thank you to all of your listeners, the fellow practitioners, families, youth, everybody who's listening. It is a great honor to be here with you today to talk about one of the things I love in this world, which is OST programming. So I would love to talk about some things that are really important for families to think about and to know as they go about choosing the right OST program for their children. So families, I'm talking to you. One thing that is really important for you to consider when you're choosing an OST program for your child is, what is the purpose and what are you hoping that your child gets out of this program? Because no two out of school time programs are alike. And different programs have different purposes. They have different logistics that you'll need to figure out for your family, days that they meet, times that they meet. In addition to those logistics, each after school program has its own goals. Some of them are really focused on academics. Others are really focused on, for example, art or music. Some are a little bit more holistic. So when it comes to what you're looking for your child, think about, what are you looking for your child? Do you want a program that's really structured? Do you want a program that is essentially like an aftercare where there's not a ton of structure to it, but there is adult supervision? Those are two completely different kinds of programs. So determine what it is you want your child to get out of that program and ask the staff if that's what they provide. Another thing I would love to share with parents and families who are trying to figure out how to choose an after-school program for your child is, what involvement do you want to have in the program? I have found that with a lot of parents, in a very respectful way, they're really hands-off. They trust the staff. They believe that the staff are going to help your child. And so whatever's going on in that program, you have full faith and you step back and let the program take over. My suggestion to you would be, or one, I guess it's a little bit of an invitation more than a suggestion, is to invite you to be as involved as you want to be in that program. When your child's going to benefit the most is when what's going on at school, what's going on in after school, and what's going on at home has some level of connection to it. That all those pieces are working together to best serve the child and your family. So please don't be shy, hesitant. You think it's not your place, there's some boundary. Absolutely not. This is your child we're talking about. So you have every right to ask the staff, what's going on with your child? Can you maybe come in and observe one day? Or can you call and get updates? Maybe you're interested in volunteering or chaperoning or coming in and teaching something. There's a lot of ways for you to be involved. And the better you understand the connection between school and after school that then shows up at your house, the better off everybody will be.
Thank you for sharing that information with us, Catherine. Now, let's jump into the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you to all your listeners for listening in. It is such a joy and privilege for me to talk about after school programming as much as anyone will ever let me. So I'm thrilled to have the platform to do it.
I'm truly excited that you could be here. To be honest, I did not want to do this start of, fundamentals of at school programming without you because you've been doing it for so long. And I feel that you can give great insight to this topic. So I want to give you an opportunity to tell us your story, but also share with us how long have you been in the out of school time programming space?
I've been in the field for a long time. I've been in education even longer. And my path to and through and continuing in the after school world, I did start my professional life in the classroom as a classroom teacher.
Mm.
I did that for a number of years and lots of different communities. I went overseas for a few years and did a lot of teaching and traveling at the same time. And something that I realized pretty early on was I was learning how to be a teacher better. I was learning how to do the teaching part of it better. But I really had a long way to go when it came to how I was supporting my students with what was going on for them outside of school. Because as we all
Mm.
know, that certainly shows up in school as well. So I don't know if you knew this, but I did start my teaching career in Richmond, Virginia.
Really?
That was, yes,
Oh,
that was my
wow.
first job out of college, and I loved it, and I knew almost immediately I was in way over my head. And so I
That's
did
usually the
continue
case.
yes.
That's usually the case. You're like, so I wasn't
Oh
sure.
boy. I mean, I it's so cringy, some of the situations I was in and didn't really know what was going on or how to respond, all 22 years of me at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so I knew then, like, I got to do something here because I'm not showing up in the way my students really need me to.
Hmm.
So eventually I went back to school for social work, not necessarily to become a social worker, but really to understand better the communities I was working in.
Hmm.
And then when I came out of graduate school, I didn't want to let go of the education. So I was saying, what can I do with this social work plus education? And the answer very quickly became very obvious, which was the after school space that
Hmm.
I could continue with my love for education and combine all this new knowledge and understanding as a social worker and serve communities in this capacity. So I stayed in the after school space as a practitioner for over a decade. I absolutely loved it. And as I started to move up the ranks, so to speak,
Hmm.
I started to see the field in a broader way, and I really started to see where we had some work to do, and
Right.
particularly when it came to how we were choosing and preparing and holding on to our staff, because you just simply cannot have strong programming without strong staffing. So that seed was planted pretty early on. And about a dozen or so years later, I said, okay, I think I'm ready to start working in a different capacity. And I went out on my own, which is most of what I do now. And that is supporting the professionals who work in the after school space, leadership and staffing and organizational development, to set them up to succeed and serve their youth and families as effectively as possible.
Awesome. So kind of tell us about that process, Catherine. Going from being in after school programming, being a frontline worker, and transitioning through all these different stages to now going to your own business and training professionals in the field. How did that come about? Like, what was your process? How did that happen? Walk us through it a little bit.
Yeah, so it really was, every position was like one step up
Mhm.
on that sort of proverbial ladder. So
Yeah.
my first program, I was in it every single day, running activities with the kids. Even though it was a managerial role, I only had two staff and all of us were working all day, every day with the kids. So I was really, really hands on there.
Mhm.
My position after that was as a director. So I was still in direct service, but I wasn't working with the kids every day. This
Right.
was my first real separation from everyday programming. And my job was to support the staff. So I learned a lot about the building teams and
Mhm.
how to hire and how to support. And what do you do when you have part timers and you want to train them, but you only have budgeted for them to come in for program and all those things that come up
Oh
in the
yeah.
after school world, and the turnover and all those things that really affect the work that we do. And my next step after that was even further removed because I was more on the funding side of programming.
Oh, you went for the money. We gonna get
And
these dollars and cash these checks.
well, and it's, that I think like with each subsequent step, it gave me a much different look or a deeper, broader look into how
Right.
the field works. And,
Yeah.
I had the frontline experience and then the organizational experience and then the funding experience where I was doing grants and that sort of thing. And that last job, because I started my career as a teacher and then was after school, it was the first time I ever really had a traditional office job, like a 9 to 5.
Uh-huh.
And very quickly I was like, nope, this is not. And I said, because when I was a teacher, I got out really early so I could go to the bank and, go to
Yeah.
these certain places. And then when I was in after school, my day started very late. So in the morning, I could do my errands and go to the dentist. And once I was in this 9 to 5, I was like, how do you ever go to the doctor? How do you ever go to the post office? Like this,
Mm-mm.
it just, it felt very restricted. I did not like the schedule. I didn't like the feel of it. I didn't like being in an office all day and not having kid energy around me. So that was a good natural time to say, I'm ready. I don't want to go back down that ladder necessarily,
Mhm.
but with all this knowledge now, how can I bring this forward and support the community on a stronger level? So I played around with different ideas. I think I still have a spreadsheet somewhere that was like, what do I like to do? And what am
Mhm.
I good at? And what does the world need? And sort of was playing around with different ideas. And it's really morphed over time. I got certified as a coach. So I thought that would be my whole business. I'd be a
Nice.
coach and I'd coach after school leaders about how to run their programs well. And then I started getting some interest from folks. Do you do training? And I said, well,
Mhm.
I've been a teacher a long time. Training can't be that much different.
Right.
It is, but I had to learn how to do that. And so then I started doing a lot of trainings. And then people would say, do you do like team retreats and team building? And I said, oh, yeah, I guess I can do that. So it sort of was responding to what people were telling me that they needed for their programming. And over time, I've also broadened my skill set. So
Mhm.
I got certified as an external assessor for the PQA, which we use a
Mhm.
lot here in the DMV. So I go into after school programs and evaluate them and work with the programs to help them in areas they need help. I
Mhm.
also got certified as an AYD facilitator. That program's been resurrected and coming back. So I've been able to train in that way. So really just trying to figure out what credentials I need in
Mhm.
order to support programs in the way that they need to be supported. So it continues to morph over time. I've been on my own 4 years now,
All
and
right.
every year is a little bit different.
Right, right, right. Especially working in this pandemic that we are managing through right now. How has that been?
Yeah, I think it was, we're still in it. Here we are in September of 2021, and we're not fully out of those woods yet. And for better or worse, and it was a lot of both, for the work I was doing pre March 2020, I wasn't doing anything in the virtual space, absolutely nothing at all.
Mhm.
And of course, in the beginning, the initial messaging we were getting was 2 weeks. We need
Mm,
to,
yeah, yeah.
hunker down for 2 weeks and this whole thing's going to be over.
Yeah, it's gonna be fine.
It's going to be fine. So in the beginning, I didn't really think much of it because, like most people in my brain, okay, I can survive for 2 weeks and then we'll get back to normal, which of course. So after those 2 weeks, then
Right.
I think one more week, I sat on my couch a little bit paralyzed with like, what do I do? Because my entire income stream is gone, and all my income stream, they're just gone.
Hmm.
So it was a little bit of a panic, a little bit of that cliche, necessity is the mother of invention. I had to figure out how to do things virtual. So a couple of good things, I guess, came out of all the chaos. One of which was a lot of programs, particularly 21st century funded programs,
Hmm.
were in this moment where they wanted and needed to pay their staffs, but they could only pay their staffs if their staffs were running program or
Hmm.
getting professional development.
Right.
And so for the programs that suspended programming, they didn't want their staff to go unpaid, obviously.
Hmm.
And so I started getting these calls of like, I don't care what training you do. We just need to pay our
Money.
staff. So can you come and do anything? I don't even care what you do, but just come and do something so I can pay my staff. So I said, I'll take it. And it's a good test for me to show them the value
Uh-huh.
in professional development and how important it is to the work that we do. So that was a great piece of it. And then the other side was I said, how can I continue to reach out to people that aren't just here in the DMV area? And I experimented with live streaming on my Facebook and Instagram and connected with people that way. I started creating virtual courses that I think I'm up to 5 of them now. One is specifically for after school professionals that anybody anywhere in the world can take the course anytime they
Hmm.
want. I have a self-paced version. And so just really understanding the different ways people can learn and grow
Hmm.
and how to not get rid of workshops and conferences. I think workshops and conferences are great, but I am grateful that 2021 and 2020 said, okay, there's other ways too, like podcasts and blogs and virtual courses. And
Right.
there's just so many other ways we can use this time to be creative and support our staff in different ways.
And talking about training staff, because we know that that is a key thing in having any successful program. You can have the bodies, but if they're not equipped to do the work, it could be chaos. It could be chaos,
Hmm.
and then next thing you know, you have to deal with the level of turnover. But you
Hmm.
also have this wave of young professionals that are coming in and learning how to mold and shape them. So, in that regard, what are some things program managers need to keep in mind on a daily basis for having positive outcomes for the program? Let me say that.
So the first foundational, and we often skip this part, which is one of the factors I think that is causing some struggle in the field, which is we have to have an understanding of what works. So a lot of times, because many of us who go into this field, we do it in an emotional way. We love working with kids. We really want to help kids. It comes from such a beautiful, sincere place. And we might not necessarily understand what best serves kids.
Mm.
Some of it's intuitive and some of it's not. And so, what I always encourage, particularly at the higher levels, at director levels and managerial levels, is that people have an understanding of what works.
Right.
Now, in what can be an overwhelming way, but also I think in an encouraging way, is that there is a ton of research out there, and
Hmm.
there's a ton of research that tells us what works. So you don't need to become a researcher to start to understand the really foundational basics of what works.
Right.
There's a couple of places you can start. National organizations like the National After School Association is trying to make that easier. They're trying to take all that research for us and say, here's some checklists, here's some lists, here's some templates for you to get started. And they've created something called competencies for after school professionals. And here's what you need to know to be what they call a competent after school professional. Most states have their own, that it might be called quality standards, it might be called standards of learning, it might be called out of school time standards of quality, and there's depending on your state, right? But a lot of states have their own, and it's almost like a big template or a big checklist that says to have a quality program you need X.
Right.
If you're federally funded, or if you get different grants, they might have their own checklists for you, depending on the program assessment you're using. I mentioned the PQA, which is evidence-based out of the Weichert Center. They have a ton of research on after-school programs, but there's a lot of those program observation and evaluation forms that come directly from the research. When you observe your program and you're checking boxes, it's not for the sake of doing so. The items that are in those instruments are there because the research tells us here's the 10, 15, 20, whatever it might be, components you need to have a quality after school program. So that really, I think, is the beginning. And I think using that as your framework, whether you are choosing the NAA core competencies, if you're choosing whatever instrument you use to evaluate your program, whether you're using your state standards, start with one and then use that to design what the professional development for your staff is going to be. Because here's the 10 areas, and it looks like we're really good at 1 through 7, but not so much 8. So that's where we're going to start, and keep coming back to that same list, whatever one you choose, so that everybody's on the same page about where the finish line is there.
Right. And you bring up a good point, Catherine, about professional development for your teams. Now, for those program directors that are managing teams, what are some things that they should keep in mind for their professional development, but the professional development of those managers that they're supervising, to make sure that they are, ensuring their success in doing their job?
A couple of things. The first is we know that the annual turnover rate in the after school field is at about 40%. So not quite half, but close enough, right? And in some programs it's higher. That's just an average. So some programs are up to almost a complete turnover every single year. The effects of that cannot be understated. When you have to constantly rehire and retrain and reorient just to do it all over again the next year, it takes time, it takes energy, you're losing money and time and institutional wisdom and the relationships you're trying to build with the students and families. So this turnover thing, we have to get a hold on that. And a couple of ways we need to do that is we need to start hiring and supporting our staffs as if we want them to stick around, as if this isn't just a summer job, as if this isn't, let's just find a bunch of college kids, no disrespect to any college kids, but very much the hiring philosophy is let's get someone for this summer. That's the intention. We just need counselors for the summer, and next summer we'll do it all over again. Instead of saying, how do we start to build a professional workforce? How do we start to recruit and prepare folks who want to stay in the field? How do we introduce them to the wonderful world that you and I know so well of after school, to say there's so many ways you can work in direct service, and there's so many ways you can stay in out of school that's not direct service. So if you carry over that passion for youth and for education, but you just don't want to be around kids all day, right? There is the research side and the policy side and the funding side and the grant writing side. I mean, there's so many ways to stay in it, but we don't necessarily prepare people for a career in this field. We
Mm.
hire them for a job in this field, and a
Mhm.
temporary one at that. And the way we set up the pay, the way we set
Another
up
conversation. We're gonna be here all day.
right. The way we set up the hours, the way we set up the qualifications, we're telling people this is a temporary job. That's what this is. Instead of saying, here's this position where you can learn and grow and move up and become a professional and make a career out of this.
Right, right. So one or two things that program directors like so give us and given that example, give us one or two things program directors need to keep in mind for building their team's professionalism. Should it be what are your team's strengths? How can you grow them as professionals? What are some of the things that they need to have one-on-one conversations with their staff about?
So one area I think that would really benefit staff is understanding what each and every one of your staff has to
Mhm.
know, either walking through the door or once they get there, that they need to know how to be able to blank.
Mhm.
Figure out what those things are. And also, figure out on an individual level how can you support different staff with the different strengths that they have and the different goals that they have. So while everyone is required to know this list that you come up with, in addition to that, you get to know your staff, what their goals are, what they're interested in, what their career trajectory is, and give them opportunities that they are interested in. And all those professional development opportunities we talked about earlier can apply really well here. I have a template I created for program directors that says it gets out of the mindset that professional development has to be every member of the staff in the same room at the same time, partaking in the same training. There are moments when that will be true, but there's this whole world of possibility to say outside of that, staff can be working on their PD in all different directions in their
Mhm.
own time. So the template that I have, it says, for example, you would fill in your own based on your own program's needs. Here
Mhm.
are the three trainings you have to do, and
Right.
you have to do them in the first 90 days or whatever the case is for you. Now, I want to make sure you do at least two trainings on socio emotional learning.
Mhm.
Here's 10 options you can choose from, or you can find your own option and
Right.
say, here's a webinar, here's a conference, here's a whatever. I want to make sure you have at least 3 hours of classroom management training per year. Here's some choices, pick one or find your own, right? So you don't just, I think sometimes program directors, again, meaning well and giving their staff autonomy, say, oh, you just find whatever trainings and I'll approve them. So in theory, that sounds nice, but in practice, if you don't know how to find a training,
Right.
it's
Right.
like it's just
You don't
too
know where to
overwhelming.
go. You don't have the
You don't know where to
tools. Like
go.
it's a lot. It's too much.
It's too much, and everyone's going to be on the internet trying to figure out how to make it. So by doing it this way, by saying, here's some options, here's a podcast, here's a blog, here's a journal, here's a this, here's a that, start to explore those different avenues. And if you find something on your own, let me know,
Mhm.
and I'd be happy to approve it. But I'm not putting everything on you to figure it out for yourself. The second thing I want to add for directors and anyone who's in any supervisory role, from frontline supervisor all the way up to executive director, one of the things, particularly if you started on the front lines like most of us did, and your energy and focus has always been the kids, that's always priority one. Once you transition into supervising staff, it's really hard and it took me a long time. You have to shift to your priority being your staff. And ultimately, it is still the students because at
Right.
the end of the day, your goals are all related to the students, but you have to do it now through your staff.
Right. Exactly.
And for too many directors, they sort of still surpass their staff, or they neglect their staff because they're
Mhm.
still so focused on the kids. So that has to be on the forefront of that transition into a management or directorial role. Is my staff is my priority, and I really have to make time for them.
Right.
That is so true, Catherine. And that's key. You have to give your staff an opportunity to sharpen and build their skills, and transitioning from that role of being one of the frontline workers to now a manager. It's important to help your team identify their skills and help them sharpen their tools. And like you said, to keep in mind that you're all focused on the same goal, which is serving the kids to the best capacity and to the best ability that you can as professionals. That is so, so important. And this is actually a good area to transition to our Professionals Lounge. Professionals Lounge is a segment that allows the guests to share advice and tips, somewhat tricks as well, if you may say, about professional development, or give you advice on what types of professional development you should take based on where you are in the field and what we may be talking about in the episode conversation. So think of it as your if I knew then what I know now, I would do blank, blank, blank. Okay? All right. With that being said, let's tune into this episode's Professional Lounge.
What are some things organizations should keep in mind as they're onboarding their staff?
So many. This is a hard one to answer because there's like 100 things, but I would say I'll do my best to limit it to a couple of major ones.
Okay, so what would be your top three? Like you must these three top things you must.
Okay, so the first one is you must onboard them. And so many places I've worked in different capacities, people are, again, so much of this goes back to that perpetual turnover problem. So often we're filling seats on an emergency basis. We have to meet ratio. We just hired you, we flew through the interview process because we needed I mean, there are practical factors at play, right? You can't run the program if you're not in ratio. So there's systems that need to be in place. But what often happens as a result of that is there really isn't an onboarding in any meaningful way. And in many cases, staff are in program running things the first day in the organization. And that is really detrimental to everybody involved. And in any job, and I don't have specific numbers for after school, I'm going to make an educated guess it's higher, but in any job, more than 20% of turnover happens in the first 6 weeks. And so why that happens in the first 6 weeks is one of two reasons. Either this is not the job that was sold to me, I was told the job would be one way and it's completely different, or I had absolutely no support as I was going through that beginning period, and no thank you. It's too much too soon. And so my hope when people are onboarding is they are not running programs their first day, that they are, a week at the minimum. I know people are going to say, how is that even possible? But that they have an opportunity to be observers in your program, that they can sit back and watch how it works. And technically it satisfies your ratios. You don't have your hands in there, but you have an adult in there, and you give them an opportunity to take it in, to watch what's going on, to see how the staff do it. They can then come back and ask questions, because if you don't do it in the beginning, it's never going to happen. Once they're right in the flow of program and they're working and leading activities and doing all that stuff, that opportunity is never going to come again. So the first thing I would say is don't throw them into the mix. a lot of times I think we advertise it as a point of pride, right? Where we say things like trial by fire, or we're going to fly the plane while we're building it or something. But those are not great ways to operate.
No.
Like, who wants to be in a plane that you're still building, right?
Right. Like,
So
we gonna die, y'all. We gonna die. We ain't gonna make it. Like, no.
that's right. So I would say give your staff a minute to take it in, see what's going on, really observe, come with thoughtful questions about it. The second thing I suggest in any field, including after school, is you want to be clear with your staff from day one. This is what the expectations for you are. And a lot of people do 90 days. I do want to say, I learned this later on because the 90-day probationary period, quote unquote, is so prevalent in so many jobs. What I've learned is that in only one state is there any legal meaning to a 90-day probationary period.
Wow.
So a lot of times people will be like, oh, well, if I decide within 90 days to let you go, it's not really a firing because it was in your probationary period. That legally, that's not how it works. I think the one state maybe was Montana, if I'm not mistaken. But outside Montana, your staff's 89th day and their 91st day legally is exactly the same. So there's nothing really preventing you. If, for example, 60 days in, you say, wow, this new staff was a mistake. They were a disaster. There's no reason for you to wait until 90 days to say, oh, this was not a good hire. At the same token, if they're amazing and you can't believe how amazing this new staff is, and you internally have some distinction between probationary and full-time or what have you, then do it earlier. I don't know, the 90-day thing, I don't love that system, even though it's very prevalent. But whatever metrics you use in that job, whatever they get evaluated on, a lot of people have a 90-day eval form or some sort of system in place. I like to share all that stuff with staff from day one. I want people to be prepared. I want people to know exactly what is expected of them so that when they get to whenever that first evaluation period is, they're not surprised and they're not thrown off guard. And within that time, you as a leader, manager, supervisor, director, however your term is at your organization, that you are meeting with them pretty much every single day in the beginning of their time to field the many questions they have, to give them some insight or have them meet somebody else or give them some feedback or give them some coaching, but really give them the attention they need so that they feel supported, they have what they need, and you're not going to have to hire someone in their stead 6 weeks later because they were so overwhelmed.
Right. Very true. Very true. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that information. And give your plug-in for those that want to follow you, that want to get in touch with you about professional development or even training. Go ahead and give them your information so they know how to get in touch with you.
Thank you for that. So my name is Katherine Spinney, and it's Spinney. Every way you can find me is going to have my name in it. So my website is katherinespinney.com. If you look for me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, it's Katherine Spinney Coaching. So it's Katherine Spinney, all places and everywhere. And you can look more closely at the trainings that I offer, at the coaching I offer, at the courses that I have. So whatever venue works for you, the website is probably the most encompassing place to start. But if you jump right to social media, I welcome you to do that. I have a blog that is somewhere between 150 and 200 posts at this point. It's largely for the supervisors of the world, though not exclusively. So if you are a supervisor or an aspiring one, there's loads of information there about how to prepare yourself to be a great supervisor and how to continue that path throughout your time as a supervisor. And one of my courses is completely free for supervisors. It's about about leading one-on-one meetings with your staff and how to do that effectively. So that gives you an opportunity to experience a virtual course. Lots of good stuff on the website. There's some other free resources there. So I invite all of you to go check it out.
Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our show. I'd like to thank Katherine for being a guest on the show. This was a great conversation. It had a lot of nuggets of truth and wisdom for me. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime soon. If you enjoyed the episode and feel you received some good information, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or visit the Podchaser website and leave us a comment. This will help us get some feedback on the show and collect testimonials for our personal website. Share us. Share us with your friends, share us with your family, share us with your network. Help us spread the word about how out-of-school time programming is impacting our youth as well as our communities. We can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. Well, that's all I have for today. In the words of Mr. Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Until next time, bye-bye.